Did this go on for too long? I was hesitant in making this video because I was afraid I would be jumping the gun, but by now I think we can all agree that we've seen too much of Sukuna Kaisen. As someone who's been following the manga since the end of the Shibuya incident arc, and with how close it seems we're getting to the end of the series, there are definitely issues I have with how the story has progressed. This isn't an analysis on the whole series, so let's start with where the majority of people consider to be the starting point of Sukuna Kaisen, Chapter 236. The death of Gojo shocked everyone, partially because he died, but it was more so about how he died. I know this has been a topic of debate for a while now, but I can't talk about Sukuna Kaisen without starting with where everything went down. Especially since enough time has passed, we can look at the fight in retrospect. I don't think many people expected Gojo to win because Yuji is our main character, so the responsibility should lie on him. So Gojo losing was pretty much a given for narrative reasons, but how the fight was resolved left a lot to be desired. In order to make the fight interesting, Gege made it so that the two characters are on even footing, trading blow after blow and using their curse techniques and battle sense to the fullest. Because that's what's compelling to the readers. A deathmatch between the two strongest sorcerers. This matchup was hyped since the very beginning of the series, so of course it had to seem very close. And that's where the problem lies. These two are considered the strongest characters in the series. Almost nobody can hold a candle to Gojo in this era. Two terrorist attacks led by Kenjaku along with special great curses, and Gojo handled both with ease. Obviously, Kenjaku sealing Gojo was an outlier, but even then, that proves that the bad guys had to resort to sealing him because they couldn't beat him. So if Sukuna won against the strongest sorcerer of today, narratively speaking, it becomes very hard for him to be defeated afterwards. And that's exactly the problem the series has been running into. I'll get into that in a moment, but let's continue the discussion on how Gojo's death was done poorly. Throughout the fight, even if they were considered to be on equal footing, it definitely seemed like Gojo had a slight edge over Sukuna. Gojo had creative ways to reset his domain, and not to mention taking the upper hand in a 1v3 against Sukuna and his 2 Shikigami. That's precisely why the Gojo 1 panel works so well as bait. But immediately in the next chapter, we get transported to the airport, the perfect switch to the bait. This becomes the recurring theme in Sukuna Kaisen. The end of chapter bait and the beginning of next chapter switch. Sure, it was shocking to go from winning to getting killed, but I feel like we deserve more of an explanation rather than Gojo glazing Sukuna, being all like, oh, he wasn't even going all out, and I don't think I could win. The other issue I had with the chapter was the barebone explanation to how Sukuna was able to land strong cleave, besides having Mahoraga adapting to infinity. It wasn't even addressed how Sukuna was able to use cleave while missing an arm. And if Gojo was aware that Sukuna wasn't going all out, why would he at any point drop his guard even against an armless Sukuna? We've seen the characters in the series pull off some crazy stunts even when heavily injured. Not only that, but throughout the fight, it's stated that Gojo can see the sparks whenever Sukuna casts a technique, meaning the only explanation that would make sense was if Gojo suffered from literal brain damage from repeatedly resetting his domain. This would have been a nice thing to make clear for the readers if that was the case. Having 237 dedicated to explaining how it happened and the steps Sukuna took to guarantee the cleave would make everyone feel better about the outcome. We know Sukuna is strong and clearly extremely intelligent as well. He quickly picked up on how to reactivate his domain after seeing how Gojo did it. It was clear Sukuna was thinking ahead the whole fight and was plotting something. Showing the steps Sukuna took in order to negate both Six Eyes and Infinity would give Gojo believers the explanation they needed and the confirmation that Sukuna believers wanted. Instead, the reason we got boils down to he just did it because of Mahoraga. And there was no reason for Gege to rush to the next part. After an all-out battle like that, giving readers some time to digest what happened is well warranted. Otherwise, it leads to what we've been getting for the past few months, which is a vicious cycle of Sukuna glazing, and it makes it very hard for the characters to get out of this hole. Hi, Future Wong Diggity here. It seems like chapter 255 was a long-waited explanation on how Sukuna was able to use cleave against Gojo. The answer was, as always, a binding vow. I have some issues when it comes to binding vows because they're almost like a get out of jail free card, but this is neither the time or place for it. This particular binding vow allows Sukuna to use cleave with one hand at the cost of having to use both hands to cast the signs and fully reciting the chant if used in the future. He also has to aim it with his palm, but that one isn't as important. So here's my question. The question is, why couldn't we have gotten this explanation a couple months ago? Having that explained 20 chapters ago would not have impacted the characters or how the story progressed. The cast wouldn't magically know he casted a binding vow, and will have to figure it out like they did now. Sukuna still would have used cleave against the sorcerers regardless. The only people it would affect would be us as the readers. Unless Gege was purposely trying to upset as many people as he could, this explanation would have made much more sense a few months back. I think the thing that irks me is that it seems like Gege had this planned out, because ever since fighting Gojo, we see Sukuna reciting the incantation in different panels whenever he uses cleave. So it's not like this was something that came to him all of a sudden. Good job Gege if purposely rage baiting us was your intention. Back to the video. Let's discuss the other part of Gojo's death before we move on, which is the glazing I mentioned. This is a deviation of how Gojo has acted throughout the entire series. The Gojo we know has absolute confidence in his abilities and is the cockiest character in the series. No matter how strong Sukuna was, it was a 180 personality shift from the Gojo that we know. I want to drive home the fact that if Gojo really believed Sukuna was much stronger than him, there's no way he would let his guard down and get off screen. This is all done to present Sukuna as incredibly powerful, but as we can see in the following chapters, Gege didn't need to do all that. This is when I started questioning how Gege is approaching this part of the series. He himself said at Jump Festa that he planned on wrapping up JJK within the next year. There's still some time, but when the news dropped, I was really worried because there are some plotlines that haven't been wrapped up yet. The major ones being the battle against Sukuna and Kenjaku's plan with a merger. Not to mention some of the other things like confirming if Nobara is dead, what happens to Megumi, and the story behind Yuji and Kenjaku, etc, etc. And this is the perfect segue to talk about the Kenjaku fight, if you really want to call it that. In my opinion, I think this fight was rushed. I feel like there should be more to this character left to be explained. I'll talk about these unresolved plot points in a second, but let's quickly discuss the fight itself. I understand that as a gag character, whenever Takaba gets involved, the fight will be more like comedy relief, and I totally get that. In fact, I'm glad we got to see more of him besides the Colon games. I'm not upset at Takaba, but rather the situation itself. The fact that Kenjaku essentially didn't do anything, and then just got one-shotted by Yuta. Where was the Kenjaku that fought against Chozo and Yuki? One who was a special grade curse, and the other a special grade sorcerer. I get that reality altering is literally OP, and I really like Takaba as a character, but Yuki died for this? Kenjaku too, of course. This was someone who has survived 1,000 years with multiple curse techniques at his disposal. Isn't it a little odd for one of the main villains of the series to go out like that? I suppose this is more of a personal issue, because I'll admit, I don't know what you can really do against a character who breaks the fourth wall. Maybe I'm just unfamiliar with Takaba's game, and he'll be the one to defeat Sukuna. Who would win? A fourth wall breaking gag character, or Sukuna equipped with Gege plot armor? In all seriousness, there are some loose ends with Kenjaku that I'd like some answers to. The biggest one being his past trying to create a vessel for Sukuna, i.e. the reason why he became Yuji's mom. He was obviously meticulous with his plan by reincarnating, experimenting, and planning out the Colon games so the merger takes place over the course of 1,000 years. So there's likely a good reason why he chose Yuji's mom as a possession target. I do think this one will be explained when Yuji is the main focus of the series again. Perhaps a flashback explaining what kind of special sauce Jin and his ancestor had in order for Kenjaku to choose him. I can't imagine Gege glossing over this one, so I'd expect this to be answered sometime in the future. As for Kenjaku's main plan, the merger, in case you forgot what it was, it's basically a third impact from Evangelion. He's trying to fuse all the humans in Japan into one curse entity. At one point, he talked to a panel of world leaders about curse energy and how to utilize it. I assume the plan is to get more people into the country and increase the energy the merger can absorb, but we haven't heard anything about that in a hot minute. And now with Kenjaku's death, along with what we've been seeing with Sukuna, I see one of the following things happening. Please keep in mind I'm not Gege and this is crackhead theory territory. I'm more so trying to present these possibilities and what its implications are. Right before dying, Kenjaku transferred the authority of beginning the merger to Megumi, which in this case would be Sukuna because he's the one in control. Kenjaku explicitly said that Sukuna was the one who has undergone the succession ritual, so barring some shenanigans, he'll be the one who decides what happens with the merger. He says he wants to have fun with the merger after he kills everyone, which leads us to the following options. Option 1, Sukuna dies with the merger, which would be the best outcome for the good guys. But this also means that the reason behind everything that has happened since the beginning will amount to nothing. Kenjaku's 1,000-year plan was put into motion when Yuji became a vessel for Sukuna. Then it was the Shibuya incident to prevent Gojo from interfering, and then the Culling games to gather the curse energy required for the merger. All of that work would go to waste. But like I said, at least the good guys won't have to deal with this if this were the case. Now for option 2. Sukuna decides to use the merger for himself, whether it be in the form of a curse or absorbing it for curse energy. He's proud, but he's not stupid. As long as it's a tool that he can use, he would use it. Mahoraga, Agito, Kenjaku, Uraume, and Yorozu are all tools in the eyes of Sukuna. If victory was his goal, he could very well use the merger to his advantage. As for the third option, Sukuna is defeated, but he starts the merger as he dies. Considering how the recent chapters have gone, the main fighting force will be low in numbers, and if that happens, I'm not sure how they're going to deal with the merger. The population of Japan is 125 million, and with a curse entity containing a curse energy of over 100 million people, even if we're being extremely conservative, will at least rival that of Sukuna. Fighting against a Sukuna level threat part 2, not looking too good for the good guys here. And for the last option, Sukuna begins the merger after killing everyone like he said he would. I think that goes without saying that at that point the story is just over. It's literally gonna be Sukuna Kaisen, but this is the most unlikely scenario, which is why I put it last. I have trust in Gege at being a better writer than me and hopefully giving us a good answer to the merger plot point. Who knows, maybe the merger somehow helps the good guys fight Sukuna and they take each other out and the good guys win. Like I said, this is just speculation based on what's been said in the story. I'm sure Gege will have a better answer for us. But in order for that to happen, it means that Sukuna can't keep getting stronger and stronger like Gege has been seemingly making him. Let's see who stepped up against him after the death of Gojo. KasHIMo, Higuruma, Choso, Ino, Yuta, Yuji, Maki, Kusakabe, Miguel, and Larue. That's 10 people, not counting Wiwi or whoever's left in the backlines waiting. How many characters did we need to throw at Sukuna and repeat the cycle of character getting hyped, character jumps Sukuna, character gets clapped by Sukuna? The weakest of these sorcerers are somewhere around first grade, otherwise they're all at least special grade in terms of power. I can't go in depth with every character, but I will touch on some of them and how they seem to exist more so for the purpose of Sukuna being perceived as strong, aka glazing. Before we begin, I am aware that the final bosses are supposed to be extremely strong, and this is not about Sukuna being strong, that's not the issue. It's more about how Gege has gone about it, more specifically the repetitive nature of recent chapters. I'll talk more about this in a later section, but for now, let's talk about the Gauntlet. KasHIMo is probably the biggest loser and the meme out of the bunch. Bro's been hyped for 100 chapters after his fight against Hakari in the Culling games. Going toe to toe with a special grade sorcerer, not even using his curse technique, just so he can save it for Sukuna. All that so it could be immediately dismantled within one chapter. For someone as hyped as he was, he couldn't escape the writing of Gege. He cooked with KasHIMo by giving him the mysterious vibe and the f*** we ball aura. Even his curse technique was really cool in concept and visual design. Since it's something that kills him after he's done, it would have been a great way to show that Sukuna isn't invincible by making him sustain some actual injuries. The panel of KasHIMo immediately jumping in after Gojo was defeated got me thinking, damn, this dude about to throw hands, and we'll get to see his full potential after waiting so long. But what did we get? He didn't even land a single attack on Sukuna after he reincarnated into his forearm form. On top of that, you know what makes it even worse? If you think the glazing from Gojo was bad, KasHIMo straight up calls Sukuna beautiful. Gege gave him the airport scene treatment where he continues to glaze Sukuna even after death, forever locking in KasHIMo as the guy whose only experience was in diffing farmers. Anyway, I'm going to move on because I'm disappointed just thinking about how KasHIMo just got tossed aside after some glazing. I just wanted to see more of him because I thought he was a cool character with a lot of potential. But hey, at least his fight will look sick in the anime, I guess. Next up on the list is Higuruma. This clash was promising since our main character Yuji teams up with Higuruma and his executioner sword. Not to mention Kusakabe, Ino, and Choso also jumping Sukuna. This was the perfect setup for a decisive battle. Yuta just finished off Kenjaku on the other end, and this is the bulk of the main fighting force. Higuruma's domain found Sukuna guilty, which meant that his curse technique or domain would be confiscated, right? Things are looking good. Nope. Turns out the curse tool that we don't even know what it does was a thing being taken away. It was there for one chapter when Uraume dropped it off during the one-sided fight between Sukuna and KasHIMo. Not only was this a classic end of chapter bait and switch, it was also a literal plot device so Sukuna would lose essentially nothing as a result of Higuruma's domain. And I doubt we'll ever see a curse tool ever again. I won't discount the fact that Sukuna could have used it, but even without it, he has no problem taking on all the sorcerers. The narrator says Higuruma has the raw talent that rivals Gojo's. Given that this is directed at Higuruma, this means that we'll see him shine, right? Wrong. This was set up to make Sukuna look better in the next chapter. All that talent just for Higuruma to get bodied within a couple panels of the following chapter. I'm not expecting him to put up a Gojo level performance, but he was able to take on Yuji pretty well in hand-to-hand combat during the Culling games. And Yuji is primarily a close-range fighter too. But all he was able to do here was stab Sukuna's hand with the help of 4 other people. Which, by the way, did nothing because Sukuna detached his hand before getting stabbed by the executioner sword. Like I said, it does seem like Sukuna's curse tool is gone for good because it didn't come back even after Higuruma got bodied. I told you, it's literally a plot device. Fortunately, Yuji was able to grab the executioner sword right at the end of chapter 247. Surely he can put it to good use and finish Sukuna off. Psych! Gege's love of bait and switches made it so that the sword disappeared within the first page of the chapter because Higuruma is supposedly dead. Wee came to grab his body, so who knows if he's dead. Apparently he also collected Gojo's body, which made me raise an eyebrow. Shoko's still out there with her RCT, so maybe we'll see that being relevant sometime soon. For all the Gojo believers out there, I still have a year's supply of copium we can all huff on. Alright, let's come back to Earth. At some point, the bait and switches Gege uses are no longer impactful if it becomes too predictable. And that's what's been happening. I understand that's generally how shonen series are, but we've seen this happen 4 times already. A 5th if Yuji's Black Flash doesn't end up doing much. It seems like even with Yuta and Maki joining, the result is the same. I'm glad we got to see Yuta use his domain before he was taken out. Being hailed as the next in line to succeed Gojo, many people are high on the Yuta stocks. I think Gege did the right thing here and made the fight with Yuji and Yuta versus Sukuna somewhat convincing, kinda like with Gojo previously. They had a strategy going in and landed some hits on Sukuna. This would have been their chance to take the W, but with how many bait and switches that happened, I was keeping my expectations low. And wouldn't you believe it, Yuta hits Sukuna with a cleave and Jacob's ladder, and surprise surprise, Sukuna doesn't get taken down, and Yuta instead gets decommissioned. Speaking of Jacob's ladder, let's talk about that for a second. This is a technique that broke Gojo out of the unbreakable prison realm and was proven to have done notable damage to Sukuna back in chapter 213. Now we have Yuta, the second best sorcerer of today, using the technique at maximum output, and Sukuna didn't even seem fazed by it. Maybe this is another unexplained binding vow that allows him to tank it, but I guess we won't know for another 20 chapters if 236 is anything to go by. The Jacob's ladder, however, wasn't completely useless because it gave Maki the opportunity to stab Sukuna right in the heart. Surely this is another bait and switch, right? Well, yes and no. Sukuna can't heal because he doesn't have RCT right now. However, we know from the cursed wound mark that Sukuna can stay alive without a heart, and this is no different. But Maki doesn't need the cheap shots. With how strong she is after merging with Mai, she is most definitely special grade. And it does seem like she's giving Sukuna a beatdown. Good job, Gege, we're finally seeing some development. Oh wait, what was that? We cut to Uraume versus Hakari just so they can say Sukuna has yet to go full out? Great. But wait, there's more. Sukuna hits a Black Flash on Maki in the next chapter. And that means 2 things. He is in the zone and he will probably hit even more Black Flashes in the following chapters. At this point of the video, I'd like to address the writing from the perspective of power levels. It's quite obvious that this is likely the final battle, so the stakes need to be high. The villain needs to be overpowered. The protagonist struggling and then finally defeating the antagonist is a standard in every action series. I understand that. There's a fine line, however, between "oh wow, he's strong" and "okay, you can stop rubbing it in our faces now." These characters are the heaviest hitters we have left. Like I said, most of this squad are special grade, with Maki and Yuta arguably being the strongest after Gojo. And if those two teamed up can't win against a weakened Sukuna, then not only Yuji, but Gege will have a hard time coming up with a way to defeat him. Who knows, maybe Gege's plan was to make Sukuna win all along. But if the good guys are to win, Gege will have to create some convoluted solution to the problem he created. Yuji will have to pull out 3 innate techniques, 2 binding vows, and at least a couple more black flashes if he wants to win. I'm not denying that Gege has done a great job when it comes to foreshadowing and laying the groundwork for future plot points. Even earlier in the series, we see him hinting at Megumi trying to summon Maharaga. And we still have Sukuna's curse technique and Yuji's soul switching to be explained. Even though there are bits and pieces of foreshadowing, it feels to me like the arc wasn't fully planned out prior to its beginning. The squad jumping of Sukuna was done very quickly in an attempt for Gege to show how overwhelmingly strong Sukuna really is, but it might have backfired on him. We were quickly running out of people who can fight Sukuna. After Maki, Kusakabe was the next to fight Sukuna, and in order for Kusakabe to survive more than half a page, Gege included a flashback saying he's the strongest within the grade 1 sorcerers. You could see it as a way for him to explain how Kusakabe was able to survive Sukuna, or it's to pad out the chapter with an explanation. Because it's a little hard to believe that a grade 1 sorcerer would survive longer than KasHIMo would. Whatever the case may be, this gave Gege another chapter's worth of time while he continues to cook up a solution to the Sukuna problem. We've seen multiple characters show up, do a little bit of something, is ineffective, and then leaves the fight. Since 236, this has been the recurring theme. There's really nothing to show for the collective Sukuna jumping. Sukuna just seems to be portrayed as more and more powerful, and we've gotten to the point where victory doesn't seem to be within reach. And we still haven't seen Sukuna use everything yet. Not to mention he's slowly recovering his domain and RCT after his fight with Gojo. Yuji's soul switching will have to go crazy somehow for this to work out. It's gone so far that Gege brought Miguel back from Africa. The narrator said this man is on equal footing with Gojo. Okay, I don't know how true that statement is because he got slapped around by Gojo in JJK0. It's just another chapter where half of it is explaining why he came back, and then stall so Yuji can come back. There's zero chance the side characters are going to do anything meaningful to Sukuna with how strong he is. The chip damage will mean nothing once Sukuna regains RCT, but I suppose the stalling is useful for Yuji. Fortunately, I think Gege has found his footing and we're stopping the cycle with Miguel and Larue. And all this is why it feels like Gege knows where he wants to ultimately end up, but didn't map out the steps to get there. The constant glazing and the repetitiveness is what made this situation frustrating to some. In the past few months, there's been a whole lot of fighting, but not a whole lot of progression. And you might be thinking that this is just a symptom of the weekly serialization, but that's not quite the case. Like I said, the fight didn't see any meaningful progression for months. If we were to compare post-Gojo death Sukuna to now, he's transformed and sustained some injuries. It's fine if the good guys were whittling Sukuna down in a war of attrition. And it seemed like that was the direction Gege was initially aiming towards, but as always, Gege loves to misdirect his readers. He keeps reminding us that even though Sukuna looks injured, he's actually doing fine. To be fair, he is objectively in a worse spot compared to the beginning of the Gauntlet, losing a cursed tool, an arm, and his heart. But we also have to note that Uraume said Sukuna hasn't gone full power, and the subtext saying Sukuna is slowly recovering his techniques. It's not just a bluff either. Sukuna still has more up his sleeve, and if he regains RCT, he can just heal everything back up. Gege made sure to remind us in 256 that when Gojo hit a second Black Flash 30 chapters ago, that's how he regained RCT, meaning Sukuna will most likely get his back soon. On top of that, he's hitting Black Flashes, giving him more momentum in battle. And of course, his mysterious curse technique, which I assume will be his trump card at this point. I think I speak for everyone when I say that we're ready to see something big happen in this fight. Lots of flashy things are happening, but it's like a tug of war. The sorcerers are the ones tugging, while Sukuna has his foot planted firmly in the ground. Personally speaking, I'd like to have seen the tides turn when Maki joined the fight, but Sukuna Kaisen was still going strong. And it's the repetitive nature of how Gege builds suspense that causes readers to be unhappy about how this part of the series has played out. I'm not going to pretend I'm a better writer by any means, but one thing JJK lacks is world building. It's not something Gege really includes in his series. We did get the hidden inventory arc, but I wouldn't expect an entire arc like that as we see the series close out. But it would be nice to have a couple chapters about the month between Gojo being released and the Shinjuku Showdown. This is something all popular shonen series do to 1. Slow down the pace, and 2. Give a sneak peek of what to look out for. Naruto is training for a new jutsu? Ooh, what's it gonna be? I can't wait to see it. So far, we have not seen a single character in the series go through any type of a training arc. And no, Yuji watching movies and being taken on a field trip doesn't count. The closest thing we got was Todo teaching Yuji how to control his curse energy against Hanami. I would like to see how Megumi tames a Shikigami. Fun fact, Tin Shadow's technique only comes with 2 dogs by default and everything else you have to tame. There's supposed to be a whole ritual where he has to defeat them in order to tame them, but instead, we just see a new one every time he fights someone. We don't have to see every Shikigami either. Obviously, the frog and the rabbit one wouldn't be that interesting to watch, but maybe the older ones like Nue and the snake would be. Max Elephant would be the most interesting one to see because that's the strongest Shikigami Megumi has. There's a certain novelty when it comes to seeing a character work towards acquiring a new skill or technique and seeing it get used in the future. And while we're on the topic of world building, the big 3 are still something we don't know much about. We know the most about the Zenin clan, but not much about their history. When it comes to the Kamo and Gojo clan, we know basically nothing, especially the Gojo clan. But I highly doubt we'll ever learn more about that. You might be thinking, well, it's not that important, it doesn't affect anything. If you just enjoy the fighting and nothing else, then yeah, it's not that important. But a good story also has good character development and world building. And Gege's aversion to world building makes it one of the weaker aspects of the series. Alright, enough of me ranting about Gege's writing. Let's talk about things he's done a good job on and hopefully will continue to do so as we wrap up the series. I know we've been in Sukuna Kaisen for a while, but it seems like we're starting to move away from that. If that's the case, then we're moving in the right direction. I think it's no surprise that Gege likes to play the long game. His foreshadowing is something we see time and time again, and that's how he defines his writing style. I mentioned Megumi and Maharaga earlier, but there's another plot point that took even longer to realize. That being the in-chain vow between Yuji and Sukuna. Even early on in the series, Sukuna was coveting Megumi's body like Orochimaru was with Sasuke. Considering how long that took to happen, we might see some answers to long-awaited questions in the near future. This took 201 chapters to happen, by the way. Recently, Gege has been putting in more explanations in each chapter. This goes hand in hand with the hints he's been dropping throughout the Shinjuku Showdown. It's something I do like about Gege's writing. It took me a while for me to realize that it wasn't a translation error and Yuji likely swapped souls with Kusakabe during the 1-month period. Another good example was Sukuna chanting the incantation for Cleave. It's written within the panels, but it's purposely hard to spot. The theory is that the noise from the battle is masking the incantation Sukuna was chanting. There's also one more thing I think he was foreshadowing, but we haven't seen yet, which is Yuta and the last Sukuna finger. We see Yuta questioning Sukuna about the last finger. This leads Sukuna to believe Yuta was the one who ate the finger, which is why he was able to use Cleave. But knowing Yuta can copy curse techniques, I'm willing to bet he's just baiting Sukuna and Yuji was the one who ate it, meaning he was probably the one who learned Cleave and Yuta copied it from him. Yuji eating the last finger is probably the key to taking down Sukuna. I don't know how exactly, but I'm sure it'll be important to the plot. We still haven't seen Yuji use Cleave or the soul switching technique yet. But since Yuji is still trying to save Megumi, I think Yuji will most likely fulfill some kind of condition or make a binding vow to get Sukuna back into his own body, and maybe a face-off in the Soul Realm like when Yuji died early on in the series. Kind of like a Naruto vs Kurama or Ichigo vs Zangetsu scenario. And since it's not in the real world, both of them can go all out. Yuji will get to use everything he's learned during the month we skipped, and Sukuna will probably use his hidden curse technique. But that's just the theory. Regardless, this final showdown is definitely something Gege has been cooking for a while. And he's not the only one cooking. Sukuna is also cooking with his curse technique. This foreshadowing is a little bit more obvious. Cleave is obviously a reference to cooking when we look at everything else that Sukuna can use. I think it all started when Sukuna surprised all of us by using flames against Jogo. I know a lot of people clown on Crunchyroll for translating his domain to Malevolent Kitchen, but it's not entirely wrong. The word shrine was translated from the kanji for kitchen. Not only that, but Sukuna's hobby besides torturing Yuji is eating humans, which further supports a cooking related curse technique. It's also probably a big part of why he keeps Uraume around. Not only are they a good servant and chef, their curse technique is probably a key factor to their relationship. If Sukuna is the kitchen, then Uraume is the fridge and freezer. Their curse technique is ice related, making a great tool for preserving humans and curses hundreds of years ago. This is a duo that complements each other perfectly. If Uraume wins against Hikari, we could see some really interesting combo attacks from the two, but I'll always bet on Hikari. Before I end the video, I'd like to talk about some new information. I've been working on this video and then 257 came out. The chapter gave us some really important lore on the relationship between Yuji and Sukuna. I'd like to talk about it more, but the video is long enough as is. If I keep going, the next chapter will be out and I'll never finish the video. I'm sure the information from 257 will be crucial to the plot moving forward in determining how Yuji is going to defeat Sukuna. It also means that some of the points I made did get answered, but as with anything, hindsight is 20/20. It's easy to pick apart an argument when you have the information, but for this video, I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who has gone through months of this repetition and how we saw the trajectory of the series based on the information we had. It's important to realize that the series has been repetitive and that important plot points are now being addressed. They aren't mutually exclusive with each other. I give credit where credit's due. If you've gotten to this point of the video, you know I haven't been completely negative on Gege's writing. There are things I like about it too, and I'm glad we're getting answers to our questions. So I'm happy to say 257 is probably the end of Sukuna Kaisen, and it'll be Yuji's time to shine. I can continue speculating all day if I want, but I'll say the real cooking to Gege and Sukuna. I know the community shares some of the frustrations I've had with the series as of late, but we seem to have finally reached a light at the end of the tunnel. I have believed that Gege will wrap up the story nicely. At the end of the day, the reason why the community is so vocal is because we just want the series to do well. Nobody likes watching something they enjoy slowly getting worse. I don't think I was being too critical to the series. What are your thoughts on Sukuna Kaisen and the direction of the series moving forward? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, Wong Diggity out.